Did you know that in the last 50 years, over $1 trillion has been spent to fight the war on drugs? Yet in the past few years, it is continuing to climb at a rapid rate. The war on drugs has been going on since 1971, and June of 2021 marked its 50th anniversary. Despite this long battle, the government is spending now more than ever to win this war. And the rate of drug use in the United States only continues to climb to new heights. You might ask yourself, why should I care about this? Drugs aren't a problem in my life. My response to that question would be that although it might not be a direct problem for you, this could be affecting your roommate, your friend, the person sitting in front of you at your 9 a.m. class, or even your sibling. Drugs know no boundaries and can begin to seep into the lives of individuals at any point. There are likely multiple people you come into contact with every day, especially on a college campus, that are dealing with an addiction to drugs that they cannot conquer alone. You may need to speak up and help them, but you will only be able to do that when you come to the realization that drugs are winning the war and the government alone is not going to solve this problem. In this presentation, I'm going to use many sources to support the information that I'm sharing with you. All of this information comes from extremely credible sources and has either been peer-reviewed or certified to be published per a .org, .gov, or .edu website. This information, other than references to the past, all comes within the last 5 years, so it is timely and updated. I have the utmost confidence in this research and know that it is also a very sensitive topic, as this may be affecting any one of you right now. Using these credible sources, I intend to show my peers that our country is losing the war on drugs and it has ultimately done more harm than good, proving that it has been a complete failure. We will be reviewing statistics from the beginning of the war in 1971 compared to today, the key differences and changes from then and now, and the effects or lack thereof that the war on drugs has had on the United States and its youth. Now that I have introduced you to today's topics, we will begin discussing drugs in 1971 and how they affected people then. When the war on drugs began in 1971, it was used as smoke and mirrors by President Nixon to get people to associate Black people with drugs, ultimately proving that it was a failure from the beginning because it was not even started for the right reasons. At this time, if drugs were considered bad and people saw Black people with them, people associated them both as criminal. Nixon knew that he could not face the Black population head-on, but if he could get others to turn against them, it would indirectly solve his problem without him being the perpetrator. This can also be seen as many other presidents throughout history, as the war on drugs has also been used as a distraction for their various behind-the-scenes motives. A primary example of this includes President Reagan and his goals for mass incarceration, while focusing on drugs being the forefront of how he could make these ideas possible, going as far as to refer to drugs as unstoppable. This resulted in people beginning to view the war on drugs as a pandemic and panic spreading throughout the general public. In order to combat the war and panic on her own terms, Nancy Reagan began a campaign called Just Say No, which actually aided in demolishing drugs because Reagan's administration focused on that campaign, and the bones of it was the United States government pushing down drug cartels from being able to pump drugs into the country as easily as they had been doing for decades. The examples of Nixon and Reagan are only a couple of the presidents from our country's history that have used this war with ill intent. However, the terrible aftermath of their ulterior plans, such as how Reagan's plan backfired on him as he ended up giving Nicaraguans guns because he needed them to stop the spread of communism, is only one example of why the war on drugs is a failure, essentially rendering Nancy's campaign pointless. Now that we have discussed the past of the war on drugs, let's discuss the present and how it has changed over the last 5 decades. Today, the majority of policymakers agree that the war on drugs needs to come to an end, as it has virtually done nothing to actually focus on the drug problem. As opposed to treating the problem as a public health issue, it has largely been seen as a criminal justice issue, which has held back potential progress. According to the Drug Policy Alliance, Black people are 24% of those arrested, despite making up just 13% of the US population, and despite the fact that Black and white people use and sell drugs at similar rates. This is instead due to targeted policing, surveillance, and punishing tactics. They also inform the public that there are currently 2.3 million people that are incarcerated in the United States, as opposed to the 315,974 people that were incarcerated in 1980, 9 years after the war on drugs began, reported by the Sentencing Project. There have been years when rates have gradually gone down, such as 2005 and 2009, proving that the use on drugs does have the ability to go down. Although drugs have gone down for short amounts of time in the past, there's without a doubt consistency in the data proving that an upward trend in drug use is more prevalent than a downward one. Now that we are up to speed on what the United States looks like today in terms of the war on drugs and mass incarceration because of it, let's talk about the effects that it's had on the youth in the United States. The youth of the United States is being affected by this problem and the lack of legitimate solutions to the use of drugs like never before. It is because of this percentage of youth that are being placed in youth facilities has risen without a sight and end. According to the Drug Policy Alliance, there are currently 2,100 people that are in youth facilities because of a drug offense, which is about 5% of the total youth incarceration rate. In another point to address the problem of youth and drugs, the CDC says that 15% of high school students reported having ever used select illicit or injection drugs, and 14% of students reported misusing prescription opioids. In 2019, the use of drugs in the youth population dropped from 43.3% in 1997 to 35%, according to Statista, proving that there was success in lowering the rate of youth drug use. There have been drops in drug use among adolescents in the United States. However, the rates, especially in terms of marijuana use, are up to 78% among high school seniors, which is an all-time high. Overall, the war on drugs has been a failure throughout our country's history and remains because of the inability to reflect on the understanding of drug use and choose a new path to defeat the problem. The problem stems mainly from the lack of proper incentives which run behind it and the inability to acknowledge that it is a public health problem rather than a criminal one, which would ultimately lower the incarceration rate in the United States. Youth in your community are struggling with this problem every day. You may not know who, but if you do know someone who is struggling, they may need someone like you to speak up and help. But you will only be able to do that if you understand that the war on drugs is a failure in this country and the government can't do it alone. We need people like you to help out. Thank you.